My name is Stephen Trimble, and this talk is part of the Bedrock Lectures on Human Rights and Climate Change. Here in the state of Utah, in the heart of the American West, the clash between federalism and states' rights scripts nearly every headline. These aren't merely local stories. Utah shelters jewels of the Republic and of the planet, remarkable lands and irreplaceable cultural resources, protected by national parks and monuments visited by millions every year. I believe most of the rest of the world sees Utah's landscapes as one-of-a-kind treasures whose preservation is paramount, where conservation and stewardship should matter far more than corporate profits, campaign donations, or the next finite economic boom in a remote Utah crossroads town. Utah's elected officials believe otherwise. They believe the land that happens to lie within the boundaries of their state is their land, no matter that nearly 2/3 of the state's acreage remains public land that belongs to all Americans, administered by federal land managers and management agencies on behalf of all the people. The highest and best use of this land, in the minds of state leaders, is profit. They are relentless in their campaign to turn over these irreplaceable canyons and mesas to the fossil fuel industry. Where many of us see wildlands, wildness, exhilaration, and refuge in remote and delicate desert country, they see only potential mines, wells, and pipelines. Utah's elite believes in market capitalism above all else. The state legislature tightly controls state agencies, limiting their capacity to address climate change. Other states in the interior West also have a fraught relationship with public lands and the federal government, highlighted by conflicts between rural and urban culture. But the stark clash in values that defines every Utah conversation about public lands, the climate crisis, and fossil fuel extraction plays out with special drama here. The history of Utah's people, the LDS Church, and the powerful influence of Mormon culture weave through every issue and decision. So let me take you to my state in an effort to decipher how we make our decisions about the places we love, and why it's so hard to persuade people in power to pay attention to the climate crisis, to imperiled biological communities, to the deeply concerning health effects of pollution, why it's so hard to move on from misguided 19th century notions of limitless progress to thoughtful 21st century adaptive management in a fast-changing world. The straight lines that outline Utah intersect 4 major North American bioregions: the Rocky Mountains sweeping down from Canada, the basin and range deserts of the Intermountain West, a swatch of the Mojave Desert in the state's southwest corner, and the canyon country along the Colorado River, the heart of the Colorado Plateau. The reason we have 22 million acres of public land in Utah is not because the federal government did not strive mightily to give it away, both to legitimate settlers and to speculators. The reason is aridity. Nearly 65% of Utah is federal land, the second highest total in the nation. And Utah is the second driest state. Next door is Nevada, the driest state in America. 83% of the state is owned by all of us. Because of our aridity, we are ecologically fragile. Because of climate change, our state will become both drier and more fragile. Utah and the Colorado Plateau lie at the crosshairs of climate change, and we will need to strategize for resiliency as our environments shift with drought, decreasing snowpack, and rising temperatures. I want to single out the Colorado Plateau. The Colorado River and its tributaries have carved this stack of mostly flat-lying sedimentary rock layers into stunning landscapes. That's why we have our greatest concentration of national parks and monuments here. In Utah alone, Zion, Bryce Canyon, Arches, Capitol Reef, and Canyonlands National Parks. Dinosaur, Natural Bridges, Hoofenweep, Cedar Breaks, Rainbow Bridge, Bears Ears, and Grand Staircase-Escalante National Monuments. That same stack of sedimentary rock also preserves ancient pools of oil, natural gas, tar sands, oil shale, coal, and uranium. We've been extracting this stuff for more than a century, whenever the market made mining profitable. When prices drop, the industry pulls out and towns go bust. It's a depressing but inevitable cycle if we never make other plans. But the politicians continue to dream of the next extractive industry boom. They will not absorb the facts of a shifting economy. They ignore science and refuse to believe that the coming climate crisis will alter everyone's lives here. They ignore the warnings of researchers and physicians about the health consequences of air and water pollution directly tied to the oil and gas industry. They treat Native nations with shocking disrespect and paternalism, even though Native people manage nearly a third of the Colorado Plateau within tribal reservations. These white men who hold the levers of power in Utah, and they are nearly all white men, have succeeded in their dreams in several places in the state. The road into the island in the sky at Canyonlands National Park now weaves through a field of pump jacks. The Uinta Basin in northeast Utah, home to the Ute Indian Tribe, has become a sacrifice zone with tens of thousands of wells, nearly all fracked, and serious levels of pollution. The Trump administration intends to lease drilling permits with no regard to the boundaries of nearby national parks, with no respect for ancient ruins and rock art, with no restraint at all. Politicians make sure the single remaining uranium mill in the nation continues to operate and to pollute right next to the White Mesa Ute community. In these images from Google Earth, watch as the fossil fuel industry comes to the Uinta Basin, taking advantage of high prices and fracking technology. Watch as the landscape transforms through the last 20 years, where the Green, Duchesne, and White Rivers meet. All those wells and pipelines leak methane and volatile chemicals. Evaporation ponds poison the air. Ground-level ozone levels in winter in the remote Uinta Basin rival the worst summertime ozone pollution in car-choked cities. At the height of the drilling boom in 2013, Donna Young, a midwife in Vernal, noticed a rash of stillbirths and infant deaths. She connected these tragedies to bouts of intense pollution. Researchers tended to agree with her, though direct causation was hard to prove. Local folks who depended on drilling were so angry, their harassment and threats drove her out of town. Most recently, these undying dreams of coal, oil, and uranium extraction helped to convince President Trump to do the bidding of Utah's Senator Orrin Hatch and the rest of the delegation, and eviscerate Bears Ears National Monument by 85%, and diminish Grand Staircase-Escalante National Monument by half. I don't need to reiterate the dangers of all this drilling. Of course we'd be better off keeping this oil and gas in the ground, conserving these unique red rock wildlands for future generations, slowing the climate crisis by reducing our emissions, protecting our health. These energy companies know the consequences of their work. Anadarko Petroleum and its subsidiary, Kerr-McGee, recently paid $1 billion to clean up old uranium mines on the Navajo Nation and to compensate people whose health has been devastated by radioactive contamination. Our dirty air, a result of our dependence on petroleum, increases our risk for miscarriages, preterm births, strokes, heart attacks, respiratory diseases, cancers, and the premature deaths of our loved ones. But most of Utah citizens never question their leaders. They re-elect them for life. There's a complacency and passivity here that permits actions that might not happen in other Western states. We know why this chasm of values is especially wide in Utah, though we hesitate to name the cause. In Utah, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the monster in the closet, the matrix not everyone wants to acknowledge, lurking inside any discussion of the politics of growth. Most people prefer to say that the divide isn't Mormon versus non-Mormon. It's urban versus rural, or developer and politician versus planner and conservationist. Worn-down activists say it's the people who care versus the people who don't care. But the fact remains that the church influences the beliefs and values of some 2/3 of the citizens in the state, all of whom have at least nominal connection to their Mormon roots. In the public sphere, the church behaves more like a corporation than a religion. Mormon culture celebrates progress and growth. Dominion is a more common word in LDS vernacular than relationship. Money and success are blessings, signs of worthiness and of God's love. Brigham Young envisioned a city of God in Zion, and to Mormons, the explosive urbanization of the Wasatch Front and the explosion of drill pads in the Uinta Basin feel righteous. Even so, liberal Mormons like George Handley, a humanities professor at Brigham Young University, find support for stewardship running through Mormon doctrine. The Mormons came to Utah in a grueling trek across the continent after their prophet, Joseph Smith, was murdered and they were driven from their Midwestern homes. In Utah, they carved a haven from the desert, creating villages and towns in inhospitable places. Here they found a place safe from terror and made a refuge for themselves. Handley, that thoughtful BYU professor, believes non-Mormon environmentalists all too often forget this history. They forget that the LDS saga of trauma and escape, the American diaspora, tends to make Mormon people defensive and distrustful of the federal government that now manages Utah's public lands and administers laws aimed at conserving natural resources. Rural Utahns especially take pride in these anti-government feelings and continue to favor politicians and developers and sagebrush rebels who drown out the calmer voices in government science and LDS communities that plead for stewardship and restraint. Other unspoken assumptions help define Mormon identity. Among them, that to be a Mormon is to be politically conservative and pro-corporate, and to equate growth with divinely sanctioned progress. Church officials, surrogates for individual thought and action, speak for the members. A respected LDS aphorism is, "When our leaders speak, the thinking has been done." I asked Dr. Brian Moench, co-founder and board chair of Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment, about why it's so hard to get Utahns to acknowledge the health risks of extraction frenzy and the pollution from millions of cars. Moench has been out to Vernal in support of the courageous midwife.
The levels of VOCs in the area were 200 to 300 times what you could explain by background levels. And they roughly equated it to what you would expect from the automobile emissions of 100 million cars, which is 8 times more cars than exist in the Los Angeles basin. So think of this area in eastern Utah that's inhabited by about 30,000 people. And there's a source of pollution equal to 8 times all the cars in the Los Angeles basin. Well, what we uncovered there, in layman's terms, a pollution nightmare. And anytime you have a pollution nightmare, you're going to have a public health nightmare. If you look at that same community 30 years down the road, if this oil and gas drilling activity continues at that pace, and it's in fact likely that the current administration may succeed in improving thousands of more wells, so it may in fact get a lot worse. If you look at that community 30 years down the road, then what we would expect to see are higher incidence of cancer in the community.
Professionally, Brian is an anesthesiologist in Salt Lake City. He works tirelessly to create change, to address the health risks of pollution.
I'm Dr. Brian Moench, president and founder of Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment. Utah is a culture that obviously is heavily influenced by the predominant religion. But as a formerly active member of that religion, who's now at some arm's length from it, I think I can say with a fair amount of credibility what my experience was. There is a complacency that envelops the community, a trust in authority, a reluctance to protest the decisions. Personal judgment on how things should be done is sometimes put on the shelf. and deferred to those in authority. And I think that does play a role in having a lot of citizens in Utah accept things that perhaps other communities might not.
I asked Forrest Cuch about the influence of the dominant religion. Forrest is a member, now an elder, of the Ute Indian Tribe. He served as Director of Indian Affairs for the state of Utah for 13 years.
That old saying about the white man breaking his promises is very true for our people, the Utes. Hardly a promise as it was ever kept, except the promise to take our land, and they did. And so I think now, though, I hear the state and legislature and the ranchers saying, well, now we want to pollute your land. And so we're going to do that. And that's what they're doing at our expense, but at a profit to them. That's all they care about is money. We get the pittance. We get the crumbs. And a poor education to boot, so that our people become terrible victims of poverty. Very sad.
Forrest is retired now to a horse ranch on the Ute Reservation in the Uinta Basin, where his experiences as a tribal member, an educator, and an activist give him a broad perspective.
And so what happens now is in the rural areas, this dominant patriarchal religion, what it does is it villainizes labor and environmentalists the way it villainized Indians during the North American conquest. You know, the Indians were the Red Devils. Well, now the Red Devils are Democrats and environmentalists. That's wrong. That's not a Christian thing to do, and it's not a democratic thing to do. If we want to live together in this country, we've got to have some respect, or it's not going to work. This country has so much here. We can have petroleum development, but it can be done in an intelligent way that is not so damn destructive. And there should be a balanced approach to all development.
Forrest asks us to confront the basic dilemma. Is land a commodity? Just another possession to generate income? Or is land inseparable from our roles as thoughtful and ethical beings, forever woven into the web of living things in the physical world that sustains us? Let's give Brian Moench the last word. In thinking about land as commodity or land as community, Brian pulls together the threads, reminds us of the health consequences of our most negative actions, and challenges us, truly challenges us, to do better.
The medical research is all headed in one direction, and that is it's a lot worse than we thought. What we know now is worse than what we knew 6 months ago. What we knew 6 months ago is a lot worse than when the federal regulations were established several decades ago. The particles that we inhale end up inside our body, end up inside our critical organs. They may stay there for weeks. Pollution you inhaled in the 1970s is affecting your mortality risk 30 years down the road. When we know what a threat air pollution is to people's health, when we know what the climate crisis represents in terms of a threat to our future, how can we call ourselves a family value state? Now we know that air pollution interferes with proper chromosomal function as babies are developing in utero. The air pollution that the mother breathes throughout the pregnancy can actually affect the chromosomal function such that by the minute that baby's born, their life expectancy has been cut short. That's just haunting. Mormons come from this pioneer heritage where our, quote, pioneer ancestors sacrificed deeply for the future. They planted orchards that they knew they would never see the fruits of. They built temples that they knew they would never be able to visit. They planned cities that they never benefited from. They did it for the common good. And that's a very powerful message. People who basically spent their whole lives sacrificing on behalf of other people, on behalf of people who weren't even born yet. Why aren't we doing that now? If we don't understand that that's a moral failing on our part, I think it's a real indictment of who we are as a society.